Hey everybody and welcome back to Sweatpants BI. Now, I've done several full-length Power BI walkthroughs on this channel, and I've also talked quite a bit about some of the contest submissions that I've done for Power BI competitions that lend themselves to the more long format infographic style Power BI tools. But I realize that I've never actually walked through how I build one of those infographic style Power BI tools at length, showing you step by step how I get to some of those designs by combining Power BI and PowerPoint. So in this series of videos, I'm going to be using a fairly popular airline customer satisfaction data set that I also took the liberty of manipulating a little bit because frankly when I first looked at the data set there wasn't all that much that was interesting about it. This often happens with data sets that are just randomized data. You know, when you start actually slicing and dicing the data by different, variables within the data, everything just kind of looks a little samey. There's not a whole lot of like really interesting insights to glean. So I did go into the data and I kind of manually played with it until I at least had some stuff that was worth visualizing. And I also added some elements to that data set that were going to be helpful for calculating things like Net Promoter Score, which I thought could be really, really helpful for someone who might be looking at visualizing sort of customer satisfaction data, maybe in some of their own work, or if they're looking to build like a portfolio piece around that flavor of data. So in the next series of videos that I'm releasing over the next couple of weeks, while I take a break to spend some time with family that Nina and I have visiting from overseas, thought that it might be helpful to release a series of videos that I've been working on, actually showing you how to build a full-length Power BI infographic. So enjoy this customer satisfaction data report walkthrough, and I will see you back on Sweatpants BI here in a couple of weeks. So obviously the first thing that we need to do is we need to pull some data into Power BI so that we can start building our infographic. So I'm going to go ahead and go up to my ribbon and click on Transform Data. And then let's go ahead and grab a new source. This is going to be a CSV file that we're pulling in. And it's just called Airline Passenger Satisfaction. Let's go ahead and connect to that. We'll hit OK. And then real quickly, let's just go ahead and explore this data set just to sort of get a feel for what we're working with. You can see down here we have 25 columns of data. And of course, the different columns and categories of data are sort of going to determine the story that we're able to tell with our infographic. So the first thing that you'll notice here is that we have a few columns here at the beginning that just sort of describe the passengers that are responding to this survey. We have an ID column that is basically a unique identifier for every single passenger and response within the survey. So however many unique values are in this ID column is also equivalent to the unique passengers and responses that we got for this customer satisfaction survey. We also have columns that tell us, the gender of these passengers who responded, their age, what type of customer they were, meaning were they first-time flyers with this airline or were they returning customers. We have columns that also tell us what type of travel they were conducting, whether or not it was just for business or personal. And we know what type of class they flew, whether it was business, economy, or economy plus. After that, we have about 3 columns that kind of describe attributes of the flights themselves that these passengers are completing the survey for. So we know approximately how far each of these passengers flew. In miles, you can see we have about 821 miles, over 1,000 miles. Some of these look like they're pretty long trips. We also have columns indicating the average departure delay and arrival delay in minutes, which could be interesting to look at since this is a satisfaction survey. Speaking for myself, if I am filling out a survey with an airline talking about how satisfied I am, if I remember that I was, several hours behind schedule, either leaving or arriving at my destination, chances are I'm not going to give a great, score to the airline or indicate that I was very satisfied. So these are two columns that, who knows, it could be interesting to see whether or not there's any kind of correlation between customer satisfaction and the delay that they experienced in getting to where they were trying to go. After that, almost all of the remainder of our columns are breaking down different facets of their travel experience, and the customers are evaluating those on with a score of either 0 or 1. I actually can't remember for this data set, to 10. Of course, with 0 or 1 being the lowest level of satisfaction that they experienced with any of these different attributes of their travel experience. If somebody gives something a 0 or a 1, that means that they absolutely hated that aspect of their experience with the airline. But if they scored something like a 9 or a 10, it means that they were extremely satisfied, basically had no complaints, had a perfect or ideal experience. And of course, we're breaking down these scores by things like the convenience of the available departure and arrival times, the ease of booking their tickets online, their check-in service, online boarding, things like their gate location. And then, of course, a whole bunch of columns sort of summarizing what their experience was like on the plane, including onboarding the plane, how comfortable their seat was, the cleanliness of the plane, and service items like food and drink, the attentiveness of the flight crew, things like Wi-Fi service, and even the in-flight entertainment. And then last but not least, just their satisfaction with the handling of their baggage. And then the last question here is going to be extremely important when we get to the calculation of Net Promoter Score, and that is how likely are you to recommend us? Recommend us to a friend, a family member, a colleague, or just someone that you randomly meet on the street that you want to talk to about how great your experience was with this airline. So if somebody says they're a 9 out of 10 for recommending this flight, that means that those people are cheerleaders for our brand, for our airline. These are the people that are hopefully going to create the positive word of mouth that we're going to need to attract new customers down the road. And of course, if somebody, is just meh on our brand or the airline, maybe they gave this like a, 6 or lower. Those are people out there who their experience could actually hurt our brand. They may be just as likely to tell someone, hey, don't mess with this airline, or I wouldn't travel with them again. These are people that could actively be hurting our brand and our reputation. So of course, this column is extremely important, and it's going to get its own section probably in our infographic. That's how important this could be. And then the last column here is response date, which is really just sort of summarizing, when did each of these respondents or passengers, when did they complete the survey? And just so you know, the date ranges here range from January 1st, 2021 through the end of December 2022. So we have exactly 2 years of survey data here. And since we have a date column, maybe we're thinking it'd really be nice if we could, break down the difference in Net Promoter Score satisfaction between 2022 responses and 2021 responses. And in fact, that is exactly something that we're going to do. And since we're going to be doing some date analysis, let's go ahead and also connect to a date table that I have here. And it's a huge date table. In fact, way more dates than we need. But let's just go ahead and bring in my big date table from an Excel file that I keep. And we'll go ahead and load that in with our airline passenger satisfaction data. And I'm going to go ahead and apply that. It's not going to take terribly long. And once everything is loaded, let's just go ahead and head over here to our data view. You can see that my date table starts all the way back in 1914. So, not long after I think the Titanic sunk. So this is way more dates than we're going to need. And we'll go ahead and fix that here in just a second. As far as our airline passenger satisfaction data set, you can see it's just under 130,000 rows. So, not a tiny data set by any means, but definitely not the largest I've ever worked with. Should be pretty easy for us to glean some pretty cool insights from this for our infographic. Now let's go ahead and go to our model view, and I'm going to go ahead and just kind of stretch this down just enough so that we can grab our response date, and let's go ahead and create a relationship between response date and the date column in our date table so that those two tables are connected and can talk to each other. And then let's go back to our report view. And since our date table is way larger than what we need, let's go ahead and filter that date table by adding a date filter column. And we're just going to use a simple if statement here. In this column, which is going to, of course, evaluate this date table row by row, we want to specify that if the date being evaluated is greater than or equal to the first response date and less than or equal to the last response date, then return a 1, else return a 0. And these 1s and 0s are what we are going to use, of course, to filter that date table. So let's just go ahead and save that. We'll head back over to our data view. You can see I have a date filter here with a bunch of 0s at a glance, but there are also some 1s. Let's just go ahead and sort this date column. We're going to sort it ascending. And then we're going to scroll through the First World War, the Great Depression, where I think we're coming up on World War II, probably the Kennedy administration. I think that I just saw the Reagan years go by. And eventually we're going to get to 2023, and our date table runs out. In 2021, you can see I've now got 1s over here in my date filter column. And if I scroll all the way to 2019, 2020, you can see I still have 0s. And as I cross from December 2020 into 2021, I now have 1s. So it looks like this is working just fine. Let's go ahead and filter our date column to make sure. We have 730 filtered rows now, or 730 dates. That seems like it is about what we would expect for 2 years worth of data. So we've got 2021 through December 31st, 2022. So that does seem to be working correctly. Of course, filters that we apply to the table over here don't really mean anything for our report. So let's go ahead and add a page level filter, or a report level filter rather, to this report, where we're going to make sure that our date table is always restricted to just showing the dates that are aligned to the response dates for our airline passenger satisfaction survey. So if I drop year, and let's just make a table, don't summarize it, you can see that I'm now just looking at 2021 and 2022 in my date table. That is what I want. Now, we've got everything modeled. We're pretty much ready to go, but before we really get started with things, first, let me just go ahead and add a measure table here, because we are going to be writing some DAX. Almost none of it is very, very complex in nature, but we definitely need a place to keep our DAX measures, to keep everything nice and organized. I don't need to actually enter any data here. I just want to create an empty table with one column. And then I'm just going to add a placeholder measure. Let's just go ahead and call this placeholder. And when I'm creating placeholders, I usually just use the blank function to just create an empty measure. Once I'm done with that, I'm going to hide column 1. And if you watch closely this table icon, as I hide column 1 by right-clicking and hiding, notice that it now becomes a measure table. So now I'm pretty much ready to go with actually developing some visuals based off of this data and some measures to get our infographic started. So before we actually jump into the more fun visualization and design elements of this infographic, let's start by sort of understanding what stories we want to tell with this data set and start building out some very basic data visuals. We're going to format these data visuals and integrate them into our design after the fact. But right out of the gate, we're going to need to sort of understand what data we have and what sorts of visuals and story elements we can compose. So let's go ahead and hop back over to our data set just long enough to sort of remind ourselves what we're working with. And of course, the first big chunk of values that we're working with are columns about the passengers or respondents themselves. How many people do we have who responded? You can see 129,880 rows, just under 130,000 responses. Gender, age, what type of customer they are, the type of travel they were conducting, what class they flew, their flight distance, and of course things like average departure and arrival delay. But especially these first few columns, a lot of this is just demographic stuff. After that, the next big chunk of items that we have is about different aspects of their experience. Did our members report, or our passengers rather, did they report having a really good experience with online booking? Did they, relay to us that their check-in service went well? Did they overall think that our seats and our legroom were very comfortable, that the plane was very clean? All of these columns basically just sum up to their overall experience with our airline. And so that's probably a section that we want to focus on, just different aspects of their experience so that we can identify, what of all of these different areas do we maybe need to focus on trying to improve. And then last but not least, we have this column, how likely are you to recommend us? Whether to a family member or a friend or a colleague. This is the most important column in this data set because this is the column that we're going to need to calculate Net Promoter Score. This is really going to tell us of the over 100,000 people that have responded to our survey. How many of those people are likely to be cheerleaders or promoters or advocates for our brand to help us generate more business? Or how many of those people are, detractors who could actively be hurting our brand and disparaging us and, telling people not to bother ever flying with us because we're terrible. So this is the column that we're going to need for NPS. And this column is so important that it's worth getting its own section so that we can really sort of summarize Net Promoter Score for different types of flyers who flew with us. So we're probably going to be using some of this demographic information to better understand Net Promoter Score and who among our passengers are promoters. So we're essentially setting ourselves up for 3 sections within our infographic. The first of these is just demographics, who responded to the survey and who's flying with us. The next one is going to be where we talk about Net Promoter Score. And the last one is just going to be summarizing different aspects of their experience flying with us. And the reason that I'm hiding each of these tabs is that these tabs are not going to be a part of our infographic. These are just little playground areas where we can start to build out our data visuals. Our actual infographic is going to be over here. And we'll just call it infographic for now. And our infographic is not going to be this landscape format here. An infographic is going to be a more vertical or long form representation of a Power BI report. And the rule of thumb that I use for these infographics is I want to try to afford myself roughly one, or at least the better part of a landscape area size for each of my story sections here. So I have 3 story sections here, so I want to make sure that I have enough room for about 3 Power BI report pages equivalent in my infographic. And if you're still confused by what I'm talking about, no big deal. It's going to be easier for me to just show you. Let's go over to our page or canvas level settings. And currently we have a 16:9 aspect ratio for this report. Instead of using that, we're going to create a custom size for our report. And currently my height is 720. So when I said that we have 3 sections and I want to make sure that I have roughly enough room for 3 Power BI report pages, worth of visuals, in my infographic, what I'm talking about here is literally just multiplying 720 times 3 to get 2160 pixels. So if I make this 2160, that means that really I have about enough room here for 3 landscape Power BI report pages all stacked on top of each other. And now I'm going to go up here to View, and I'm going to change my page view to Fit to Width so that you can see I now have a pretty long scrollable Power BI report page. So this is going to be our infographic. Now I'm going to head back over to my canvas settings, and what I'm going to do now is I want to add on top of this 2160 quite a bit of additional padding for things like my title across the top of the report, maybe some descriptive elements or sections. So what I'm doing now is I'm just going to go ahead and round this up to 3,000 just to make sure that I'm leaving myself enough room to also add some additional storytelling elements along the way. And down here, I'll probably add something like a, text or summary of recommendations, based on the survey responses. So, obviously you can sort of configure this according to what you need for any given infographic, but I typically go with nice round numbers like 2,000, 2,500, 3,000, however many pixels I determine that I need based on, sort of multiplying the 720 pixel default height of a landscape Power BI report page by the number of stories that I have to tell. I usually just kind of round up quite a bit. So I could have gone with 2,500 or 3,000, but I'm just going to go with 3,000 here so that I have plenty of room in my infographic here to play with. But I digress. We've got our infographic page set up. Now it's time to start actually building out some visuals for our new demographics section.